Welcome to Energy Talks, the podcast for energy nerds and inquisitive folks who enjoy interesting conversation. I'm journalist Markham Hislop. Once again, today's podcast is about electric vehicles. There's a reason for the frequent reporting about the global electrification of transportation. Energy media has an energy transition theory of change, and it has two parts. The first follows new clean energy technologies like solar, batteries, and EVs along their slow development path on the bottom of the adoption S curve. Then around the inflection point where they become competitive with existing technologies like internal combustion engine cars. Once those new technologies start zooming up the hockey stick part of the S curve, then they begin disrupting existing industries and business models. A sector immediately upstream of the automotive industry is the oil business, which, if you look carefully, is already beginning to show the very early signs of being disrupted. And as you all know, Canada is the world's fourth largest oil producer. For our American viewers and listeners, the United States is the largest producer. That's why we pay close attention to EVs, and why I'm very pleased to again interview auto analyst Sam Abuelsamid. Welcome back to Energy Talks, Sam.
Oh, it's good to be back with you again, Markham.
Well,
Been a while.
I haven't interviewed you for a while, and since I did, you've left Guidehouse. You're now at Telemetry and leading up a research practice. Good for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We started this new research and advisory practice focused on transportation and mobility at the beginning of this year, and it's going very well so far. We're very pleased with the results so far.
Well, I came across your light duty vehicle forecast almost by accident. Glad I did. And so I wanted to talk to you about that because I'm very interested in what's going to happen to the global vehicle fleet between now and 2050. That plays a huge role in oil demand and hydrocarbon demand in various modeling exercises. So why don't we just start out with give us your summary of the report and where you see the light duty vehicle sales going between now and 2035.
Yeah, so in this report, I did forecasting for over a 10-year span through 2035, as you mentioned, of global light-duty vehicle sales, and broke that down by different powertrains, by internal combustion, hybrid, plug-in hybrid, extended range EVs, broke those out separately from plug-in hybrids, battery electric, and fuel cell vehicles. And then also did three different scenarios based on a variety of factors, such as, for example, global trade policies and economic growth and things like that. So there's a baseline scenario, an aggressive scenario, and a conservative scenario. And different numbers for each of those, and it varies. It's going to vary depending on which market you're looking at. So it's also broken down by 8 different regions: North America, Europe, China, India, Latin America, Middle East, Africa, and so on. So we do project some growth over the next decade, although not very aggressive growth. It's going to be fairly modest growth in global light-duty vehicle sales, and it's not. It varies quite a bit depending on which region you're looking at. Some places like Europe actually expecting to see a decline in overall sales. Others like China will probably have the strongest growth, but not necessarily as strong as it has been in the past, and it could the growth could even be more modest because China's population is projected to have peaked around 2022, 2023, and is kind of plateaued right now and is expected by the 2030s to actually start declining. And India, on the other hand, is projected to have continued population growth through about 2060 before it peaks and starts to decline.
Well, let's talk about your base case, your conservative case, and your aggressive case. I've got the numbers here in front of me. And the base is sales grow from 85 million to 97.7 million by 2035. Conservative case, 81.5 million to 88 million. And the aggressive case is 87.8 million to 103.9 million. If you were a betting man, Sam, which of those cases would you bet on?
Probably somewhere in between the base and conservative scenarios. I think the base is most likely to be the highest, but at least based on what's going on right now with global trade, I think economic growth is particularly in North America is likely to slow down or even go negative at least over the next couple of years, and that is going to hamper sales. And in fact, what I've projected is that in the conservative scenario, we could be seeing nearly 2 million units a year of vehicle sales lost in Canada and the US annually over the next decade. So close to 20 million units of sales lost over a 10-year period in that conservative scenario relative to the base scenario.
Well, that's quite significant. And given the fact that you brought up the Canada-U.S. trade, and of course that leads us into a discussion of President Trump's auto tariffs, which I don't think anybody really knows exactly how they're going to play out, but everyone is assuming major disruption and problems for the Canadian industry because so much of that industry is tied to it's integrated into the U.S. industry. So cars go back and forth, parts go back and forth all the time between Canada and the U.S. Now, if I remember correctly, you are a Windsor boy, and you grew up there. You know that industry well.
Actually, I
What
grew up in Hamilton.
come see, come saw. For a Western boy, that's close enough. But here's the thing. What's your take on where we're going to go? What the effect that this is going to have on the Canadian industry?
Um, the trade policies, at least as they are as of today, which is April 29th, roughly 3:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time, because this has changed so frequently in the last 3 months, and there are expected to be further announcements later today. Donald Trump is going to be speaking in Michigan around 6 p.m. Eastern today, and there's some reports that they're going to back off a bit on the tariffs for automotive, but uh, in the based on what they're trying to achieve, which is what their goal is to have all manufacturing in the U.S. Inside the United States, and the way trade policy and foreign policy has worked out over the last 50, 60 years, what's happened is we've the industry has evolved to have an integrated supply chain and manufacturing chain pretty much across North America, United States, Canada, and Mexico. There are components and vehicles being built in all three of those countries that have largely traveled across borders duty free for decades. And so, if we move away from that, first of all, it's going to take several years to reposition everything. And by isolating each of the countries, particularly isolating the United States, what's going to happen between the combination of the trade policies and various other policies that are antagonizing the United States' traditional allies and trading partners. Essentially, the U. The U.S. is increasingly isolating itself from the rest of the world. No other countries are not going to want to trade with the U.S. They don't trust the U.S. anymore. They don't trust the U.S. to hold to the agreements that it has made. And so, for example, for Canada, what we're likely to see is some of the production of parts and vehicles that's currently happening in Canada, and vehicles that are being shipped and parts that are being shipped into the United States. Like, for example, Toyota and Honda both have big manufacturing facilities in Ontario. Most of the 400,000 plus Toyota RAV4s that are sold in the United States are built in Ontario, in Cambridge, Ontario. About half of the Honda CRVs and Civics sold in the United States are built in Alliston, Ontario. GM builds a bunch of pickup trucks, full-size pickup trucks in Oshawa. Some of that, over time, if these policies stay in place, is likely to migrate back to factories in the U.S. What will probably happen as a result is that vehicles in the US are going to get more expensive. Vehicles in Canada are going to get more expensive. And I think that Canadians, as we've already started to see, Canadian consumers are increasingly turning away from American goods, not just in automotive, but across the board. And I think that we're going to see more openness from the US's traditional allies and trading partners to working with other countries. I would not be the least bit surprised in the near future if, for example, BYD goes to Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, and says, "Hey, I would like to build a factory in Windsor or in Brampton. What do you think about that?" And Doug Ford is probably going to hand them a check for $500 million and say, "Go at it."
That is fascinating because, of course, for some of our viewers who aren't aware, last May, President Joe Biden put on a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, the importation, and then in September, Canada followed suit. And but if the relationship with the United States is strained, broken, whatever, then the impetus for Canada to continue with that is a whole lot less. And what do you think? Okay, so BYD is heading off to be. It says it wants to be an electric car company,
Mhm.
even though it produces still some combustion cars. Is that what it would set up in Canada to do? Is to make EVs, or would it be a range of, you know?
It will probably be a mix of some EVs and some plug-in hybrids, maybe some EREVs, extended range EVs, which are kind of like plug-in, a cross between plug-in hybrid and a battery electric. But some mix of those. I would imagine they'll probably produce maybe several different models with a mix of powertrains.
So while we're talking about BYD, I've talked to a number of, interviewed a number of other, sort of Asia-based automotive consultants, and they're talking about how the growth in Chinese production and of course their pivot away to electric vehicles, away from internal combustion engines, is completely disrupting the global industry. The
Mhm.
legacy manufacturers are having a really hard time adapting. So what we're seeing in North America is really a reflection of what's going on in some other parts of the world. And a major development here seems to be China's pivot away from North America. Says, okay, you don't want our cars, that's fine. We'll sell to the global south. To
Yeah.
and what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, China has far more production capacity than they can consume domestically right now. It's estimated that they have somewhere close to 40 million units of production capacity in China. And sales are about 27, 28 million right now. And they have been making big inroads into the global south, as you say, in Latin America, as well as Southeast Asia, South Asia. There are a variety of Chinese companies, BYD, Chery, Geely, many others are making huge inroads into those markets. Uh, Even in Mexico, BYD has captured a significant portion of the Mexican market, perhaps as much as 10% market share in Mexico. And I expect that to continue. And I expect the some of the larger Chinese OEMs to expand production in those markets, to localize production in those markets to help keep costs down and make the local authorities more comfortable with people buying rather than just buying imported Chinese products. You know, even if they're Chinese branded, built locally. So I expect that to grow significantly in the next decade, and that's going to be a big problem for the U.S. automakers because the U.S. policies are rolling back emission standards, rolling back fuel economy standards, and if U.S. automakers um, follow suit and pull back from EVs and plug-in hybrids, their products are going to be less and less competitive globally, combined with that antagonism towards U.S. products, and so the U.S. auto industry is going to be in big trouble.
I would have to agree with you. And I would you expect to see a fair amount of consolidation amongst the legacy automakers, and maybe even led by U.S. based companies?
Yeah, I do. I do expect to see significant consolidation globally, and even among Chinese OEMs. There are well over 100 Chinese automakers, many of whom, I mean, we hear about BYD and Chery and SAIC and a few others, but most of the Chinese automakers sell relatively fewer than 100,000 vehicles. And in some cases, only a few tens of thousands of vehicles. We've already seen a few of them go under in the last year or two. There's some reports that, for example, CATL is interested in potentially acquiring NIO. And so I think that we will see consolidation in every market, in China, in North America, and in Europe. At the very least, we'll see some of the number of brands decline. So even within, like for example, Stellantis, brands like Chrysler, and perhaps even Dodge could potentially go away and leave just Ram and Jeep for North America. And similarly in Europe, some of the smaller brands going away.
Now, your background before you became an analyst, you were an automotive engineer and you did a
Mhm.
lot of work in software. And we've talked about this in previous interviews. And one of the consistent themes coming out of China is how the Chinese automakers have excelled at making, sort of smart cars, highly sophisticated cars with technology, with software and other technologies you just can't get in North America, and they're reasonably well built. And I'm really would like to know, given your background, what you think of that.
Yeah, the Chinese market has really jumped on this whole concept of the software-defined vehicle, and in part that has to do with the fact that they have been very strong in adopting electric vehicles. You don't a vehicle doesn't have to be electric to be software-defined, but it makes it a lot easier when you have fewer of those mechanical systems to deal with. And so what we've seen is a lot of these Chinese manufacturers that aren't working with a lot of legacy architectures. They're adopting more centralized compute architectures in the vehicle, building new software platforms, and even the trend we're seeing now, for a few years ago, looking back 3-4 years ago, they were among the first to really adopt these centralized compute architectures that were pioneered by Tesla. But it's really the Chinese that have really taken that and run with it. And they were among the first to adopt chips like the NVIDIA Orin, which is a very high powered chip that is running these central computers in many vehicles. Now we're seeing a transition away from NVIDIA as well. At the Shanghai Motor Show last week, NIO was showing off, they were talking about their new in house developed chip that they're going to be replacing the NVIDIA chips with. Xiaopeng, another Chinese OEM, doing the same thing. They've developed their own chip. A number of other companies are using chips from Huawei and other manufacturers. Horizon Robotics is another one that is used by quite a few Chinese OEMs. Even Volkswagen has now transitioned for their Chinese market vehicles. They're launching a new line of electric vehicles that are using chips from Horizon Robotics. So the Chinese have really gone all in on this concept of software defined and being able to provide a wide variety of services, doing frequent over-the-air software updates to add new features and capabilities to vehicles.
Wow, that's we had heard that, and give me. I remember. I'm not sure if it was our conversation a few years ago or somebody else, but I remember someone saying, that Tesla had at least a 2 or 3 year lead in technology over other electric vehicle manufacturers. And it seems like the Chinese have just caught Tesla, which was considered the most technically advanced EV on the market at the time, and surpassed them in a speed that I don't think we could have imagined 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Yeah, no, they have definitely surpassed Tesla. The leading Chinese automakers are definitely the global leaders in this whole space. They are doing more with modern electronic architectures and software architectures than anyone else in the world. They are redesigning vehicles on an 18-month to 24-month cadence, whereas most other automakers around the world have, 4 to 6 year or more cycles before they redesign a vehicle. The Chinese are doing it every 2 years. And that's a pace that with electrification, it's a lot easier to do that because you have a simpler vehicle platform architecture. Um, and they also have a lot of the expertise in battery design. They're doing a lot of the battery development, so they're taking on the latest generation of batteries, things like sodium ion batteries and LFP batteries. So they're just moving faster than everyone else.
My, I want to get back to the global south for a moment, Sam. And the emerging economies have lower average incomes than say the global north, and so we would assume that the China will succeed in those markets to some extent based on its ability to deliver low cost electric vehicles. And I was thinking, I think it was the BYD Dolphin that came in at 9,000 US. Are we seeing the industry in China really focus in on those low cost EVs, knowing what the market is in the global south?
I mean, they certainly dominate in low cost EVs, but they're not just doing low cost EVs. They're also doing mid level and premium vehicles as well. They've got a lot of high end products. BYD has launched a new brand. His name escapes me at the moment, but they've got a new electric, 1,000 horsepower electric SUV that is a premium model. Xiaopeng and others are also launching premium models like that. So they're across the entire spectrum. Yes, in those developing markets, they are predominantly shipping over the lower cost vehicles like the Dolphin, the Seal, but they also have high end products, and that is also hurting, for example, the European premium brands in the Chinese domestic market.
Um, I want to get your take on some battery announcements lately. We saw BYD come out with its 1 megawatt charging vehicle infrastructure, its charging infrastructure. That
Mhm.
was get you 400 kilometers in 5 minutes. And then at the Shanghai show, the CATL came out with its battery that will get you charge it for 5 minutes. Now you're going to get 523 kilometers, which frankly is pretty much the range I get with my internal combustion engine vehicles, my Toyota and my Infinity. So is so this question has two parts to it. Are those innovations game changers? And where might the industry keep innovating with respect to batteries? Because it doesn't seem like they're finished by a long shot.
Yeah, so the megawatt charging is an interesting thing that we're seeing recently out of China, and it could be a game changer. First of all, you do need to take some of those numbers with a grain of salt, a fairly large chunk of salt, actually, because when they talk about 400 kilometers or 500 kilometers in 5 minutes, that is based on the estimated range of the vehicle and efficiency based on the Chinese test cycle, which is notoriously somewhat optimistic. Realistically, real world, it's more like about maybe 60% of that. So you're talking maybe 250 to 300 kilometers within that 5 minutes, which is still a lot. It's still a big jump. The other thing that we don't know until someone has done some independent testing, there's in the past, there's been lots of claims about being able to charge at very high power rates. Um, you know, Originally 300, 350, 400 kilowatts, now 1,000 kilowatts. Um, Typically, those most of those vehicles that can charge at those high power rates cannot sustain that charge rate for very long because the battery heats up. So what we don't know is, how long can it actually charge at a megawatt? It might only be a couple of minutes. So it might be that you're getting the equivalent of 300 or 400 kilometers in 5 minutes if you were to extend that over a 5 minute period. So we don't actually know, but nonetheless, it is going to be faster. The other thing, the other challenge around megawatt charging is if you're going to have a charging station that has a bunch of megawatt chargers, you need a lot of power going into that charging station. So you need a lot of infrastructure bringing the power, delivering that power. That gets expensive because you've got to have a upgraded grid to support that. So that is problematic. I think what has actually been one of the more interesting announcements that hasn't gotten talked about very much recently um, is CATL's Chaco swap system, which is a battery module swapping system. So it's designed around a standardized module form factor. And they're offering it in either LFP, so lithium iron phosphate, or NMC, nickel manganese cobalt chemistries, and two different module sizes. And then manufacturers can choose to use one, two, or three of these modules. So NIO has had quite a bit of success with battery swapping over the last 5 years. They've got about 3,000 swap stations now, but those only work with NIO vehicles because they all use the same battery form factor. And the problem we've had across the industry with battery swapping is everybody uses different battery pack form factors. What CATL is providing now is a standardized module that everyone can use, and they've already gotten 10 different Chinese OEMs to sign up to use this, and the swap system is designed so it can rotate the modules 90 degrees. So depending on the size of the vehicle and the form factor, you could have a small vehicle that has one module that's mounted longitudinally. You can have the modules mounted laterally and have one, two, or three modules if it's a larger vehicle. And you can still swap in 5 minutes. And that process, you get the same or more energy in 5 minutes, but it requires a lot less energy to charge because now you're charging those modules offline. And you've got standardized modules that can work across a wide variety of vehicles. And they want to build several thousand of these swap stations across China over the next several years. And they're also in talks with NIO. I mentioned earlier that there's some speculation they might buy NIO outright. They are definitely, while that may or may not happen, they're definitely in talks to buy NIO's swap station network. And NIO has launched a new low end brand, their Firefly brand, that is going to use the Chaco swap modules. And I think those are actually more interesting than the megawatt charging.
Yeah, I one of the things I wondered about that, Sam, uh, and I guess the argument against light duty vehicles is that 85% of charging, if those stats still hold true, get done overnight in somebody's garage. And so, the not having battery swapping can work really well. But once you get into the heavier vehicles, and I'm thinking primarily long haul trucking here, but maybe there are probably other applications, battery swapping just seems to be a no-brainer in that industry. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But I want to go back to that 85% stat you just quoted, which is true up to a point, as are so many statistics. It, yes, most of the charging that's done on EVs today is done at home overnight, but that's because we're considering, the EVs are all generally still relatively new, and new car buyers represent a small minority of overall drivers, particularly in North America. And people that buy new cars tend to be a little more affluent. They're more likely to live in a single family home with off street parking. They can charge at home. But as you go down the funnel in the market and start looking at the used car market, which is in North America is about 3 times the size of the new car market. Now you have a lot higher percentage of those people. In the US, it's about half. I'm not sure what the statistic is in Canada, but it's probably similar. About half of used car buyers live somewhere where they can't charge at home. They either live in an older urban neighborhood where they may have to park curbside, or they live in an apartment or a condo, some multi unit dwelling where they can't necessarily charge at home. And so, if we want EVs to expand to take over the entire vehicle fleet eventually, we have to have solutions that will support them. Public charging is one part of that solution, but I think swapping is also a key component of that solution. And so, I think longer term, we really do need to look at swapping even for light duty vehicles. Another factor to consider as well, an advantage to swapping, is batteries comprise the biggest single part of the cost of an EV. Depending on the vehicle, anywhere from 30 to 35% of the cost of that vehicle is in that battery. If you have a vehicle with swappable batteries, and what CATL is doing is they're offering a number of different monthly plans. It gives, depending on how much driving you need to do, for a certain number of kilometers, it might be 20, 30, or $40 a month equivalent. Uh, you, if you buy just the vehicle and you're not paying for that battery, then you can significantly reduce the cost of that vehicle. And now you're just paying for your usage of the battery rather than actually paying to own that battery.
It's a very interesting model. But maybe let's wrap up the interview this way, Sam. I've had a couple of interviewees talking about solid state batteries, which I think are expected onto the general EV market around 2028, maybe somewhere in that range. And as an engineer, what do you think the impact of solid state batteries might be on the trends we just talked about?
uh, Basically accelerating all those trends. Assuming that manufacturers can get to the point where they can produce solid state cells at scale, which is still a problem, is manufacturing them at scale, both large format batteries, but also in high volumes. Then what that does potentially is increases the energy density of the batteries. So you can have smaller, lighter batteries and still have the same range. It also potentially reduces the cost and improves the safety of the battery pack because it eliminates the potential for some of the thermal runaway. So it that you can combine with these other factors like high power charging or battery swapping. These are not mutually exclusive technologies. They can work in concert together. And so now you can potentially have an even smaller module that gives you the kind of range that you need for your daily driving. And then, when you need to do a road trip, you can swap it very quickly. Or in some cases, for some medium to larger size vehicles, you may just drive around daily with just a single module. And then when you need to do a longer trip, you can have two modules installed at the swap station or three. And so it basically you consumers can end up paying more for what they use as opposed to what they might think that they're going to need in 2 or 3% of their actual usage of the vehicle.
Yeah, I would agree. I've always thought that that was a clever idea, the one, two, or three module battery arrangement, so that I mean, most of what we do in our family, is run around grocery getting, that sort of thing. There's the odd medium range trip, and then there's the occasional in a year longer trip, maybe 1,000 kilometers, something like that. And that kind of an arrangement would work very well for us. And I think it would for a lot of families. So, well, look, Sam, thank you very much for this. Good luck with your new venture at Telemetry, and we'll look forward to a lot more of these interviews now.
Great to talk to you again, Markham, and hope to talk to you again soon.